everyone who's got an Audi A3, you have a Bugatti in the airbag. On top of that, I completely stripped the interior out. But then I found more damage.
Have you ever watched someone fight for months just to hear an engine do what it was built to do? That is the story of Mat Armstrong and the repossessed Bugatti Veyron he bought for a price he has only ever described as significantly lower than the car deserved. He rebuilt it from a non-running, gearbox-damaged mess into a machine he believed was finally ready to chase its 253 miles per hour top speed. He found a homemade fix for a key system that should have cost a fortune. He got the dashboard clear of every warning light, and then, on the runway, with everything seemingly perfect, the Veyron broke down again. The BMX rider who became the internet's favorite car mechanic. Mat Armstrong was born on the 11th of June 1993 in Leicester, England, and his earliest education in mechanics did not come from a classroom. It came from his father, Tony Armstrong, a working mechanic who ran his own garage. Long before Mat became known to millions of viewers, he was a boy standing beside his father, watching engines come apart and go back together, absorbing a kind of practical knowledge that no amount of formal training quite replicates. His parents separated during his childhood, and alongside his sister Holly Michelle Armstrong, he grew up balancing school life at Lutterworth College with a passion that had nothing to do with cars at all. That passion was BMX. Armstrong spent his teenage years as a competitive freestyle rider, picking up sponsorship from brands including Mad Gear Pro, which funded his travel to competitions across France, Germany, and Dubai. For a few years, it looked as though his future might belong entirely to the sport. He filmed his own riding to share with sponsors, a habit that, without him realizing it at the time, was quietly teaching him the foundations of video production and storytelling that would later define his career. But BMX careers are short and brutal on the body, and Armstrong's ended the way so many do. A shoulder dislocation during a qualifying run at the BMX World Championships in Germany left him with lasting instability and forced him out of competitive riding for good. What followed was a familiar story of a young man working whatever jobs he could find while figuring out what came next. He worked at his father's garage, delivered food, bartended, and took shifts in automotive retail and tuning shops. He launched a YouTube channel under his own name on April 7, 2013, originally built around BMX trick content. But the trajectory of his life changed when his girlfriend's Audi TT was badly damaged in a crash. Rather than write the car off, Armstrong bought the salvaged vehicle and filmed the entire rebuild. That series became the first real expression of the format that now defines his channel, buying wrecked or written-off vehicles and bringing them back to life in front of an audience. A breakthrough came during the COVID-19 pandemic, when Armstrong purchased and restored a damaged Bentley Continental GT, a project that introduced his channel to a much wider audience hungry for hands-on content during a period when most of the world was stuck at home. From there, the projects escalated in both ambition and value.
You got one hole here for the top ball joint, and then you've got the holes for the brake caliper, and we also have a wheel bearing in the middle which comes with it.
He rebuilt a wrecked Porsche 911 GT3, once owned by fellow creator Adam LZ. He restored a Lamborghini Murcielago that had sat non-running for years. He gave his father a meticulously rebuilt Ferrari F430 as a personal gift, a project that highlighted the bond between them as much as it showcased mechanical skill. By March 2026, his main channel had crossed 6.3 million subscribers, with his combined channels reaching close to 9.86 million subscribers and 1.492 billion total views. None of that scale came from luck. It came from a willingness to take on cars that everyone else would have walked away from and explain every bolt, every failure, and every fix to an audience that kept coming back for more. What Armstrong did not yet know was that his appetite for impossible projects was about to collide with the single most complicated car of his career. Stay with me, because the next chapter explains how that happened. A hypercar bought on impulse and a six-figure problem solved with a fuse. In late 2025, Armstrong had already taken on one of the most demanding projects of his career: the restoration of a heavily damaged Bugatti Veyron Pur Sport, one of only around 60 ever produced, on behalf of American influencer Alex Gonzalez. That project had introduced Armstrong to the brutal economics of hypercar ownership. Bugatti had quoted approximately $1.7 million for a factory repair, later reduced to an offer of $600,000, which the owner turned down.
All the light blue stuff on this car, we're going to change. I don't know if it's going to be the right decision or not, but let's see. I think we've gone for a classy colour, unlike...
When Armstrong and Gonzalez pursued an independent rebuild instead, Bugatti refused to sell official parts to support work conducted outside its authorized network, effectively blacklisting the car's VIN and making genuine components nearly impossible to source through normal channels. Reporting from Voxel Matters noted that the saga turned 3D printing into a central part of the rebuild conversation. As Armstrong's team weighed whether digitally manufactured components could stand in for parts the factory refused to release. The situation became public when Bugatti Rimac CEO Mate Rimac responded directly, explaining that independent repairs on a car of that complexity carried real safety risks and that the vehicle should ideally return to Bugatti's facility in Molsheim, France. Armstrong acknowledged the concern, but chose to continue the project on his own terms. It was while he was still deep in that Chiron saga, working out of Florida, that the Veyron entered his life. Armstrong purchased the Bugatti Veyron through a repossession company, acquiring a car with a Dubai market history and limited documented ownership records. He has been candid that this was never part of any long-term plan. A Bugatti, he said, was never on his dream car list, but he came to view the Veyron as very possibly the best car the world would see in his lifetime. A machine made all the more significant by the fact that only 450 were ever produced. Healthy examples of the Veyron now command prices exceeding £1.5 million, yet Armstrong has only ever described his own purchase price as significantly lower, a phrase vague enough to leave fans guessing whether he paid six figures or crept closer to seven. The car he received was far from pristine. The Veyron had a non-running gearbox issue that through any official Bugatti channel would ordinarily come with a repair estimate of roughly $350,000 to $400,000. For a car already purchased at a steep discount, a gearbox bill of that size could easily have erased the entire value of the deal. Instead, Armstrong diagnosed the fault himself and traced it back to something almost absurdly simple: a blown fuse. He replaced it with a component sourced from Halfords, the same shop where most British drivers buy wiper blades and air fresheners. In his own words, captured on camera, the contrast was impossible to ignore. A 300,000-pound gearbox problem solved with a part that cost a few pounds. That fuse fix became the first proof that the Veyron's complexity was, in places, an illusion built on Bugatti's pricing structure rather than genuine engineering exclusivity. Armstrong took that lesson further during a routine service. Official Bugatti Veyron servicing has been rumored to run as high as $25,000 depending on the work required, largely because the brand routes owners through an authorized network with premium labor rates designed around white-glove customer experience rather than raw mechanical cost. Armstrong bypassed that entirely. He discovered that many of the Veyron's components are standard Volkswagen Group parts, carrying patented Bugatti part numbers, including spark plugs that cross-referenced directly to standard NGK units and accumulator tanks shared with the humble Volkswagen Lupo, a city car that could not be further from a hypercar in price or prestige. His full service bill came to £1,193.83 pounds, or roughly $1,600, a figure that turned what should have been a punishing maintenance cost into something closer to servicing a well-used hatchback. It was a remarkable moment for a project that had only just begun, and it set the tone for everything that followed. Armstrong was not just rebuilding a hypercar, he was quietly dismantling decades of mystique around what it actually costs to keep one running, proving in the process that the badge on the bonnet carried far more of the price tag than the parts bin ever did. But mystique was not the only obstacle standing between him and a working Veyron. Keep watching, because the next problem could not be solved with a fuse. The parts battle and the legal loophole standing in his way. Fixing a Bugatti Veyron is rarely just a mechanical exercise, and Armstrong learned that lesson the same way he had with the Chiron. Once the gearbox fuse issue was resolved, Armstrong discovered a string of additional faults working against him, including an engine misfire, a leaking radiator, and a separate fuse box problem layered on top of the original gearbox fault. Solving each issue meant sourcing genuine replacement parts, and that was where the project hit real resistance. Armstrong explored whether Bugatti would sell him the components directly, only to run into a legal loophole that effectively prevented the sale of certain parts for vehicles being repaired outside the manufacturer's authorized network. It echoed the exact situation he had already lived through with the Chiron, where Bugatti's refusal to release parts had become a defining obstacle of that build, and it confirmed that the Veyron project would not be a simple repeat of the gearbox fuse miracle that had defined the rebuild's opening weeks. This was not a problem unique to Armstrong. Fellow YouTuber Mark McCann had encountered a strikingly similar pattern while attempting his own Veyron rebuild, a parallel that underscored just how consistently Bugatti has restricted independent access to components for its most complex hypercars. For a company that built its reputation on engineering without compromise, the policy made a certain kind of sense from a safety standpoint. A car capable of covering more than 370 feet every single second at top speed leaves very little room for a part that has not been manufactured to exact tolerance. But for an independent mechanic working without factory support, it meant every fault carried the added burden of figuring out where a legitimate part could come from at all. Armstrong pressed forward anyway, relying on the same resourcefulness that had already turned a six-figure gearbox scare into a Halford's fuse and a $25,000 service estimate into a $1,600 reality. He refreshed the Veyron's bodywork and repaired damaged components by hand. And he made one significant cosmetic decision along the way, swapping the car's original light blue accents for a satin metallic silver finish that gave the rebuilt Veyron a noticeably different presence than it had worn under its previous Dubai market ownership. Every fix, every diagnostic session, every workaround was documented for an audience that had already watched him face down Bugatti's parts policy once before with the Chiron, and who understood by now that nothing about owning one of these cars, even broken and discounted, would ever be simple. What remained after the gearbox, the misfire, the radiator, and the fuse box were all addressed was the single biggest mechanical mountain still standing between Armstrong and a fully functioning hypercar, a feature that very few owners ever interact with directly, and that almost no independent mechanic had ever attempted to recreate from scratch. Stay until the end, because solving it required something close to ingenuity. Cracking the code on top speed mode. Unlike most performance cars, the Bugatti Veyron does not simply let a driver mash the throttle and discover its limits. Unlocking the car's famous top speed mode requires a separate speed key, a physical key distinct from the one used for ordinary driving, that reconfigures the Veyron's active aerodynamics and lowers the car into its high-speed setup. This is not a cosmetic feature. The standard Veyron's quad-turbocharged 8.0-liter W16 engine produces 987 horsepower and 922 pound-feet of torque, enough to push the car from a standstill to 62 miles per hour in roughly 2.5 seconds and onto a recorded top speed of 253.81 miles per hour, a figure verified by German officials during factory testing at Volkswagen's Era-Lessien track, and one of the achievements that made the Veyron one of the defining hypercars of the modern era. The car takes its name from Pierre Veyron, a Bugatti development engineer and Le Mans winning race driver from the 1930s, while the EB in its official designation honors company founder Ettore Bugatti. Engaging that level of performance safely requires the car's body and suspension geometry to shift in ways that only the speed key can authorize, lowering the ride height and adjusting the rear wing to manage downforce at speeds where a single misjudged or misjudged surface could be catastrophic. Rather than pay for an official replacement key, a process that would have meant going through the very Bugatti channels that had already proven hostile to his project, Armstrong worked with an auto locksmith to build his own version after discovering that the underlying system appeared to rely on a relatively simple mechanical key mechanism. It was, in many ways, the natural extension of everything he had already proven with the gearbox fuse and the discounted service bill that a car wrapped in 8 figures of mystique was still, underneath all of it, a machine built from identifiable components that a sufficiently determined person could understand and replicate. Even with a working speed key in hand, the Veyron kept fighting back. A blown fuse knocked out the indicators. A persistent engine misfire kept triggering warning lights on the dashboard. A TPMS fault threatened to block top speed mode from activating at all, since the system is designed to refuse high-speed engagement if it cannot confirm the tires are in the correct condition for the demands involved. Armstrong and his team worked through each fault individually, replacing parts, running diagnostics, and completing test drives until, for the first time in the build, the dashboard was finally clear of every warning light. At the runway, with new wheels fitted and the homemade key in hand, Armstrong inserted it and gave it a twist. Top speed mode activated immediately. After months of fuses, misfires, radiator leaks, and a parts battle that mirrored everything he had already endured with the Chiron, the single most technically demanding system on the entire car worked exactly as intended on the first real attempt. It was, by any measure, a genuine triumph. The kind of moment that justified every Halford's fuse and every hour spent arguing with a parts department that did not want to sell him what he needed. Armstrong was not planning to chase the full 253 miles per hour figure immediately. His intention was to ease into the car's performance with a shakedown run, building confidence gradually rather than testing the limits of a freshly rebuilt hypercar on the very first outing, a cautious approach that made sense given everything the car had already put him through. The team had driven more than 150 miles to reach the runway without a single major issue along the way, a detail that made what happened next even harder to absorb. Mid-run, with the dashboard clear and top speed mode engaged, the Veyron suddenly developed a new fault and lost power. The car began shutting down unexpectedly and refused to run properly, leaving Armstrong and his team scrambling for answers on the tarmac, while the weather, finally cooperating after months of delays, sat completely wasted around them. Diagnostic checks pointed toward a possible communication issue involving the fuel pump control module, though the exact cause remained unconfirmed by the end of the session. It was another frustrating setback for a project that had already been plagued by gearbox pressure issues, electrical gremlins, and engine problems. The footage ended on a cliffhanger, the team huddled around the car, working to diagnose the latest failure before attempting, once again, to find out what the rebuilt Bugatti Veyron could truly do. What makes the moment so striking is not simply that something else went wrong. It is the pattern it completes. Every time Armstrong has solved one layer of this car's resistance, whether through a fuse, a homemade key, or a willingness to ignore Bugatti's pricing structure entirely, the Veyron has answered with a new and unrelated failure. The gearbox gave way to the parts battle. The parts battle gave way to the speed key challenge. The speed key challenge gave way, just when victory seemed secure, to a fuel system fault that appeared without warning on a runway 150 miles from home. For a car built to dominate every record book it has ever entered, the rebuilt Veyron has spent this entire project refusing to let its new owner forget exactly how unforgiving it can be, even after it has been beaten. Whatever the fuel pump control module turns out to be hiding, Armstrong has already shown again and again that he is not the kind of owner who walks away from a problem simply because it is expensive, rare, or wrapped in a name as intimidating as Bugatti. A car with only 450 examples ever built was never going to give up its secrets cheaply. And the fact that Armstrong has dragged this much progress out of a repossessed example with a Halford's fuse, a homemade key, and a refusal to be intimidated by an official parts department says as much about him as it does about the Veyron itself. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss a video. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think went wrong with the Veyron. And share this with someone who loves a good hypercar comeback story.